Hello and welcome to This Week in Global Development. I'm Adva Saldinger, your host today, and I am joined by two of my amazing colleagues, Sara and Elissa, who have been working around the clock to bring the latest news in one of the most fast-paced news weeks I think any of us have been a part of, as we've sort of watched really rapid changes at the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the largest bilateral donor, was the largest bilateral donor basically until the last few weeks. Elissa, maybe I'll turn to you first. We really saw things start to, we'd seen announcements already about foreign aid funding freeze, senior staff being let go, but things really picked up over the weekend where there seemed to be sort of increasing tension and increasing sense that this wasn't just about a review of existing foreign aid, but really move to shutter the agency. So tell us a little bit about, some of the things that you were reporting on and seeing sort of throughout the weekend into this week.
Definitely. So absolutely, Adva, such a flurry of activity and such a flurry of just like constant change hour by hour, it seemed, for all of us, I think, across Devex and across the sector. But over the weekend, that really went into high gear. So maybe I'll start with just mentioning that Elon Musk, who is the billionaire that now runs the Department for Government Efficiency, or so-called DOGE, sent a number of tweets over the weekend really talking about USAID as a criminal organization, saying that he was sending it into the wood chipper, along with a number of other kind of statements and comments, really making it clear that this agency was being targeted. And it was kind of the first of a number of different federal agencies to be put under the chopping block, so to speak. So what does that mean? I mean, we saw it over the weekend and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, thousands of staff being locked out of their accounts, thousands more than had already been locked out, more placed on administrative leave, more placed on, just these complete holds. They don't know, we're hearing from people across the world that are just saying, I'm in Ukraine, I'm in the Middle East, I'm across the world. I have no access to any of my USAID systems. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I have a job. I don't know if I should go home, etc. Couple hours, days, who knows what the time now later, we found out that Secretary of State Marco Rubio was now acting administrator of USAID. So he's now seating, doing both jobs at the moment. And he also announced that there would be a review, but essentially that review would result in USAID being absorbed, at least certain bureaus, certain offices, et cetera, into state. And really kind of what that means is still unclear. But at the moment, people are kind of scrambling to figure out like, okay, what does a smaller hollowed out version of USAID look like? And then perhaps I'll just end with the kind of latest big piece of news, which is that on Friday, tomorrow at just past at midnight, all staff who are direct hires at the agency, with Rubio has said some exceptions, but it seems like really all staff will be placed on administrative leave. So that's kind of the last move of this gutting that we've seen over the last several weeks.
And I think one thing that's been sort of clear in that letter from Rubio and in sort of what we're hearing from sources is that, this isn't like USAID is just going to become a department under the State Department. It is going to be a much, much smaller version of what it was. And I think exactly what that will look like, we don't quite know, but we have heard, rumors about, really like maybe it's 5% of the size that it was before. So this is a really dramatic sort of shift in what the agency will look like, potentially what it will focus on, et cetera. The last thing you mentioned was this sort of edict that went up on USAID's website, which had been down for days, saying that all direct hires, including staff that were overseas, were going to be placed on leave starting on Friday. And that was, we'd already seen, USAID relies very heavily on contractors. We'd already seen a lot of them being placed on leave, shut out from systems, not really knowing their status. But really, a lot of these direct hires working abroad are foreign service officers. They are Americans who have, dedicated their life to serve through USAID. And I think, Sara, you wrote a really great piece sort of highlighting some of their stories. And so tell us a little bit about what people are facing now that they're suddenly being told you have 30 days, less than 30 days to get out of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Tuesday's order just spread widespread chaos and confusion among the thousands of USAID workers and workers abroad. And there's just been little clarity from the administration on how all of this will play out. And there's many layers to kind of how it impacts people and programs and colleagues on the ground in these countries. Um, I spoke to USAID workers abroad, and they just feel like the rug has been pulled out from under them. There's the personal aspect of it. Kind of people have built up their lives in these foreign countries. A lot of them have made great sacrifices to come to these countries and take on these roles. And then people are dealing with other things in their lives. Heard about people going through, cancer diagnoses, and I spoke with a career service officer who is 7.5 months pregnant with her partner, and they have a high risk pregnancy with complications. They need a medical evac. I spoke to her again today, and she said the U.S. government denied the medical evac. So they're kind of dealing with this really, scary life event while also trying to pack up their life. Um, you know, Pulling their other child away from the home that child knows. And there's kind of this element of the question of what happens next for workers. So a lot of workers told me, they've been, calling to figure out where in the U.S. they might be able to stay, whether friends or families. I was told kind of in normal circumstances, if a USAID employee is evacuated, they would be given per diem and lodging when they return to the US. And I was told today by someone that they're hearing that won't be the case. And so this person said, we're going to be put on a plane and kind of left to fend for ourselves when we land in the States. They have to take their kids out of school and kind of re-implant them in new schools in the US. And then there's a lot of concern about colleagues. So one woman I spoke to, she works in a war zone, and they're working on providing life-saving medicines to refugees, and that work has stopped. Schooling programs where she said, some of the kids at the schools, that's the only reliable meals they'll get during the week, and that's cut off. And then another element of it is in some of these countries, they're working with people that have opposed oppression in their own countries and have aligned themselves with USAID, and kind of pulling out rapidly puts these people in risk. And this woman I spoke to said that for some of these people, that will cost them their lives, that they chose to align with the United States because they thought that they would be protected in that sense. Another element that I've heard from people is just this uncertainty around the waivers, the exceptions to the stop work order. Those have included PEPFAR and emergency food aid and life-saving medicine, but it's unclear kind of how all of this will play out. They were in the notice that was put out on Tuesday. People were told that by 3 p.m. today, Washington, D.C. time, they'll be told if their work is, considered essential, and whether they will have to evacuate, and kind of included in that waiver. So there's people that still don't know if they're going to have to evacuate or not. And then another element of this also is that the USAID payment system has been shut down, and there's so many consequences of this. One thing is that workers told me that they're owed thousands of dollars by the government for expenses like travel and health premiums. But also the other element is that with the financial system not working, then they're not able to disperse money to partners. And that plays into this whole waiver conversation too. that, the organizations, implementing organizations don't have the funds to actually, actualize that work. Another thing I heard is that people are locked out of timesheets, so they're not, getting paid in that sense either. And
On that, right, there's a real concern that they're being told this will be a paid administrative leave, but that if
right,
they're locked out of the systems that they need to submit their timesheets to, that they won't be paid. And then people are being sent to the US without really a place to live, or any income in many cases. Because one of the things that struck me in some of my conversations is very often when one family member is working for USAID, the other family member might make a sacrifice. Maybe they have to not, maybe they leave their job so that their partner can pursue the passion, or maybe they're also working in the USAID or State Department sphere. So it can be really complicated. I want to talk about this waiver issue a little bit, because this is something we're hearing a lot about. And one of the things that we're hearing is, so there are waivers for, life-saving humanitarian assistance, for food aid, for parts of the PEPFAR program. But, as you were saying, one of the things we're hearing is that money can't really get out the door. Because, for example, a lot of NGOs, the way it works is that they'll draw down grant money, and that's how they can fund delivery of programs. But that payment system isn't working, so they can't draw down funds. And Elissa, I know you and I have both had conversations with people about, the talk in Congress. And there is some talk in Congress, and I think the administration has said this. Marco Rubio has said, the Secretary of State has said, the only reason that aid isn't getting out is because these organizations aren't pushing it out. The waivers are very clear. Everything we're hearing from organizations on the line, on the ground, is that the waivers, in fact, aren't clear, and that payments aren't moving, so that they can't actually administer these programs that do have waivers. And we're starting to see some members of Congress point that out on PEPFAR, on food aid, for example, where there's food aid sort of stuck and rotting in ports, when it should be being shipped somewhere. And so I think that's one thing that we're looking into. Elissa, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about sort of the waiver and payment situation, what you've heard. And I know you were also yesterday at a big rally protest on Capitol Hill with a lot of lawmakers. So curious what you're hearing from them.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, the waiver system seems like it's a kind of a total mess at the moment. We're hearing from, and I spoke to an organization just last night who was telling me there's kind of 3 buckets of problems with the waiver system. So the first is that organizations have applied for waivers. They're not hearing back, we expect, because there's really barely anyone left at the agency. So that's one. 2 is that organizations have received waivers. So things have come through that they can do that life-saving work, but the tap is still dry. There's no money, as you said, Adva, being spent on these waivers. There's no money flowing, so nothing can happen. And 3, there's the issue that many things that are deemed, or one would assume they would be deemed life-saving aid, are not qualifying for waivers, or they're not hearing anything from contract officers about their applications for waivers, or that they would or would not apply. So this is everything from work that's helping children starving and needing emergency food assistance in Yemen, to people crossing over, as on the border of Uganda and Congo, which is experiencing an eruption of violence, and organizations not being able to respond to the immediate needs, people coming over the border. So there's a number of different issues here, right? And I think that the main thing that I'm hearing frustration over is this kind of, as you mentioned, Secretary Rubio's statements that it's easy to do. These organizations could figure it out. He could not make it more clear. But on the other side, if you talk to any organization, they couldn't say that they would say that that's farther from the truth. We heard some of this, or I heard some of this yesterday. We had a couple staff that were at this protest, as you mentioned, Adva, on in the American Capitol. They estimated 3,000 people were there. So it was a real showing of people just really worried. I think there were almost 20 Congress members, all Democrats, which I'll just point out they have the minority right now. So I think people are, at one hand, feeling happy that they're surrounded by many people, that people care. But on the other hand, there's a sense of fear. There's a sense of, what can this do? Will this translate into action? these Democratic senators don't have the majority in Congress. So what happens next, even if they do believe in the fact that USAID shouldn't be dismantled? So there was a lot of emotion yesterday, a lot of tears, a lot of frustration, a lot of hope, a lot of, I think it was emotions were all over the place, as it has been these past couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think on this issue, we've seen, several examples this week of Democratic lawmakers sort of speaking out and asking questions about USAID, making the case for why USAID is important, including some, like a Senate resolution that was introduced. We've seen some letters from groups of senators to Marco Rubio asking questions about USAID and everything that's happening. But there hasn't been a lot of sort of vocal support from Republicans. We have seen a few sort of tweets and statements about, the fact that PEPFAR is a really important program and funds aren't getting out there. We saw a senator tweeting about food aid being stuck in ports, and also another talking about the sort of role of USAID in countering China. But it hasn't been sort of united bipartisan conversation to date. And I think there are a lot of questions about what Congress can and will do in the coming weeks. I think one really key point to watch will be the appropriations process. There's a U.S. government funding deadline in March, and I think that will be one moment where we'll see how things are starting to shake out. I wanted to, one of the conversations I had this week that stuck with me, because Sara, you were sharing these stories of staff who are overseas who are suddenly in this limbo and turmoil, trying to uproot their lives and figure things out. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is one of the people who I spoke to who's in this situation said, even amidst all of this, one of the things that the staff were focused on is who can they hand off their work to? How can they ensure that life-saving programs are continuing? And really the challenge, which I think will likely get even more difficult come tomorrow when all direct hires are on leave, is who will be there to actually execute or run these programs? Will there be the necessary knowledge to get the aid that has waivers out the door? And so that's something that I know we're going to be watching closely. I wanted to sort of ask each of you, what are some of the big issues or questions that you're watching as we sort of, come to the end of this quite tumultuous week in the aid sector, where we've seen, really dramatic change and sort of the repercussions of that, and which will be felt for quite a long time. What are you looking at? What are you thinking about? What are you hearing from people about what they're wondering about what's next?
Just in terms of kind of speaking to people abroad, there's a lot of questions about like what will happen to us moving forward. Will we, like my contract says XYZ that I am entitled to healthcare, but one person said, it seems like there's no rules anymore. And so I think kind of, like when will there be clarity, and what will is the US government going to, provide for us moving forward? I think that's a big question. And then there's a lot of questions around, like, can the Trump administration do this? And, like without the act of Congress, can the administration, dismantle an agency? So, and kind of what, one thing I'm hearing a lot as well is, what sort of like legal grounds, what sort of lawsuits will come, who is behind that, like when are these lawsuits gonna kind of move forward?
Yeah, I would just echo all of what Sara said. I think that's definitely the question is this legal? I feel like even folks who I've spoken with that don't really approve of foreign assistance or have different views on it have also said the same. I don't think this is legal. I don't think the way that the organization or the way that the state and the Trump administration is going about doing this is a legal approach to doing so. Questions again about contracts. I think labor laws is a big thing that's going to arise in the coming days, weeks, and months. In the US, people can be let go, pretty pretty easily, but in other countries, that's really not the case, which is something that I'm learning in terms of just the way in which USAID and the government will comply with labor laws in different countries that say that you need, in some cases, several months of notice and leave before people are let go. I think that'll be a big question. The other piece is, I think, Adva, this is something you mentioned at the top of the call today, is just what does a hollowed out USAID do? What does it look like? What is its ability to look at foreign assistance? And what does that foreign assistance mean under an America First agenda when it's been so stripped away? So I think there's just so many questions. There's more questions than answers at this point. And we're going to trying our best to get you as many answers as possible as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I want. Go ahead.
Sorry, just to add one other element that I've kind of heard repeated in conversations is just like, how is this fiscally responsible? I think with the aspect of, you know, bringing people there is kind of the administration talked about this review, you know, where programs could be either canceled, modified, or continued. So are you bringing people all the way to the United States, shipping their things home just to send them back? And another element too that I heard about is, you know, in a lot of these countries, the government owns housing, you know, and so you can't necessarily get out, you know, that people, you know, work and live in the USAID staff abroad. You can't necessarily just cut the lease right away. And so, you know, you're paying for empty houses and whatnot, and paying for individuals to, rather than, you know, take the 3 months, do the review, make the decisions, and then move forward. There's questions around how does this make fiscal sense to just suddenly stop all the work right now?
Yeah, and I think there's also, to add on to that, a question about invoices being, you know, placed for work that's previously done. We mentioned earlier that a lot of that work has not been paid for. I'm hearing that just on the contractor side alone, so these are the international development companies that do a lot of this life-saving work, the amount that's owed is in the hundreds of millions. That's for past work, not work that was going to happen. And if the government doesn't pay it back within 30 days, there's something called the Prompt Payment Act, which starts to accrue interest. So is this, I think, question that I'm hearing is this saving money? Is this going to end up costing the US government more in the long term once it's navigating these legal issues, these payment issues, these interest issues, all of these kind of tangle of, you know, kind of ripple effects, right, that are coming out as a result of the stop work, as a result of these folks being let go or placed on admin leave or put on severance, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, and I know this is something that you're looking at too, Elissa, is what is sort of the intention and the end goal behind this review. I think initially people thought, okay, it would be a review. They'd see programs that they don't like. They will cut those and other programs will be turned back on. I think from what I hear from people, there's increasing questions about how much will actually be turned back on. But obviously we'll wait until we see the results of this review for some of those answers. I wanted to just mention a few other stories that we had this week. We had a look at sort of the implications of the stop work order on UN agencies. And, you know, we also had a story that I think was just out today looking at how the US decision to pull out of the World Health Organization is having ripple effects, and Argentina has followed suit. Stories about the impact of the foreign aid freeze on Ukraine, really interesting story, and about sort of climate impacts from the pullout. And yesterday I also reported that, you know, some people thought that in this shift to really shrink USAID, the US government would be much more focused on sort of private sector means of development, including the US International Development Finance Corporation, which is the United States DFI, does private sector investments to further development. people thought that the DFC was kind of in favor in this administration. It was created in the first Trump administration. And at least what I'm hearing from staff is that that's the message they've heard from the administration. But reported yesterday that staff were told that all probationary staff were going to be let go shortly. And that at an agency that grew in the last two, basically doubled its staff in the last 2 years, is likely to be a really significant number. And so we're starting to see some of the implications of the sort of government-wide staffing executive orders and workforce reductions happening in some other agencies as well. So there is, you know, as Elissa said earlier, the news seems to change by the minute, by the hour. And I'm really thankful for the work that both of you are doing to help all of our Devex readers stay on top of that. So I just wanted to thank you both for joining me today. And this has been an episode of This Week in Global Development. Please follow the Devex Daily Newswire for all the latest on what's happening with USAID. Thank you.